My name is Audrey, and I am 27 years old. 4 weeks ago, my older sister Serena walked down the aisle of the Plaza Hotel in New York City, wearing a custom silk ball gown encrusted with 5,000 Swarovski crystals. It was a $50,000 masterpiece that Vogue magazine had already dubbed the wedding dress of the century. As cameras flashed and guests gasped, Serena held the microphone and told 400 of society's elite that this dress was a gift from her dearest friend, the elusive Parisian designer known only as A.Rose. She claimed she was the muse who inspired the collection. She claimed she and the designer were soulmates. She was lying. Serena didn't know that the designer she was bragging about was actually the little sister she had banned from the wedding. She didn't know that Maisonnet wasn't a French heritage brand, but the company I built from nothing after our parents kicked me out. And she certainly didn't know that the black velvet box I had just left at the reception desk wasn't a wedding gift. It was a receipt. When she opens that box in front of her billionaire fiancé and the fashion press, her perfect lie is going to unravel on live video. But before I tell you what was inside that box and how it destroyed her reputation in seconds, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only do this if you believe that the truth always finds a way to be heard. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever been excluded by the people who were supposed to love you? To understand why I chose to destroy my sister's big day, you have to understand where I was sitting while she was saying her vows. I wasn't in the pews with my family. I was sitting in a bistro across the street, watching the ceremony on my iPad like a stranger. On the screen, Serena looked perfect. She was radiant, confident, and completely unaware that she was wearing a Trojan horse. She had spent her entire life treating me like a mannequin, something silent to be used and discarded. She thought she could ban me from her wedding because she was ashamed of my job as a seamstress. She thought she could wear my art while erasing my existence. But she forgot one thing. An artist always signs their work, and my signature was about to be revealed in the most public way possible. To understand why a sister would destroy a $50,000 wedding from a cafe across the street, you have to understand the architecture of the Vance family. In our house, there was a strict hierarchy that was as invisible and unbreakable as a glass ceiling. My sister Serena was the muse. I was the mannequin. Serena was the sun everyone orbited around. She was loud, demanding, and effortlessly beautiful, the kind of child who learned early on that a tantrum was just a negotiation tactic that always ended in her favor. By the time she was 10, she had a closet full of designer dresses and a shelf full of beauty pageant trophies. And then there was me, Audrey, the spare part. I didn't get new clothes. I got Serena's cast-offs. But because Serena was 3 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier than me, nothing ever fit. That was how I learned to sew. Not out of passion, initially, but out of necessity. If I didn't want to look like I was wearing a potato sack to school, I had to learn how to take in a waistline and hem a skirt. I remember the exact moment I realized my mother didn't view us as equals. I was 12 years old. Serena was 15. And preparing for the Junior League debutante ball. My mother had bought her a champagne silk gown that cost more than a Honda Civic, but it was too long. Instead of taking it to a professional tailor, my mother pointed at me. "Audrey is handy," she said, sipping her Chardonnay. "Make her do it." I spent 3 hours on my knees on the hardwood floor, pins in my mouth, carefully adjusting the delicate silk while Serena practiced her acceptance speeches in the mirror. At one point, Serena kicked me in the shoulder because I was pinning too slow. When I yelped in pain, my mother didn't scold her. She didn't ask if I was okay. She looked down at me with an expression of cold indifference, as if a piece of furniture had made a noise. "Quiet, Audrey," she said, delivering the verdict that would define my entire adolescence. Serena was born to shine. You were born to serve. Know your role. I didn't cry that night. I finished the hem. I steamed the silk until it was perfect. And then, I retreated to the attic. That was where I found it, covered in dust sheets like a ghost. My grandmother Rose's old Singer sewing machine. My father called it junk that needed to be thrown out. But to me, it looked like an escape pod. I realized something in the dark of that attic while the sound of Serena's laughter drifted up from the living room. They thought they were training a servant. They didn't realize they were forcing me to master the one skill that would eventually give me power over them. Because in the world of fashion, the girl in the dress is just a prop. The person holding the needle is the god who decides how she looks. When Grandma Rose passed away 2 years ago, the Vance family did not mourn a matriarch. They mourned the potential loss of a safety net. At the reading of the will, my parents and Serena sat in the front row of Mr. Lawson's office, dressed in performative black, eager to hear about the real estate and the stocks. I sat in the back, invisible as always. The division of assets was predictable. My father received the portfolio. My mother got the beach house in the Hamptons. Serena inherited the vintage jewelry collection, or at least, the pieces she deemed wearable enough for her Instagram feed. When the attorney finally called my name, my mother actually checked her watch, annoyed that the proceedings were dragging on. To my granddaughter Audrey, Mr. Lawson read, sliding a heavy, battered wooden box across the mahogany table. I leave my most personal possession. The contents of this box are for her eyes only, Serena scoffed, loud enough for the secretary to hear. Looks like you got her old sewing scraps, Audrey. Maybe you can make a quilt, my father chuckled, shaking his head at what he assumed was a final, worthless gesture from a senile old woman. They grabbed their deeds and their diamonds and left without waiting for me. I took the box back to my studio apartment, the one my parents refused to visit because it was in a questionable part of town, and opened the latch. It wasn't sewing scraps. Inside lay a leather-bound sketchbook, its pages yellowed with age but preserved with care. It was dated 1958. As I turned the pages, my breath caught in my throat. These weren't doodles. They were architectural masterpieces of fashion gowns with structured bodices, avant-garde silhouettes, and intricate embroidery patterns that were decades ahead of their time. Grandma Rose hadn't just been a hobbyist. She had been a genius. But she had lived in an era, and in a marriage, where a woman's place was in the kitchen, not running a couture house in Paris. My grandfather had forbidden her from working, locking her talent away in this box for 50 years. Tucked into the back cover was a handwritten letter addressed to me. My darling Audrey, it read. They see you as the shadow, but I have always seen the light. The world was not ready for my designs, but it is ready for yours. Take my dreams. Finish them. Build the empire they told us we couldn't have. I turned to page 42. There, sketched in charcoal, was a design titled The Swan. It was a ball gown with a dropped waist and a neckline that mimicked the wings of a bird in flight. It was breathtaking. That night, I didn't sleep. I traced every line of her work. My family thought they had walked away with the fortune, but they were wrong. They got the money, which they would eventually spend. I got the legacy, which I would use to buy and sell them 10 times over. That sketchbook became the blueprint for Maison A. And page 42? That was the exact design Serena would steal 2 years later. Thinking she had found a forgotten scrap of paper, unaware she was handing me the weapon that would end her. They laughed when I bought a one-way ticket to Paris the day after my high school graduation. My father sat in his leather armchair, swirling his scotch, and looked at me with the same pity he reserved for a bad investment. Sewing is a hobby, Audrey, not a career, he said, echoing the exact sentiment he used when he told my sister to go to business school instead of art school. You'll be back in 6 months when you run out of money. Just don't expect us to pay for your return flight. He was wrong. I didn't go back in 6 months. I haven't been back in 9 years. I arrived in Paris with 2 suitcases, and Grandma Rose's sketchbook clutched to my chest like a shield. The reality wasn't the romantic montage you see in movies. I didn't have a view of the Eiffel Tower or a handsome neighbor. I lived in a damp studio apartment in the 11th arrondissement that smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. I worked 18-hour days as a petite main, a lowly stitcher in the basement of a fading fashion house. My fingers bled daily. My back ached constantly. But every night, while my sister was posting photos of her sorority parties and shopping sprees on my parents' credit card, I was building something real. I used my grandmother's designs as the foundation, but I added my own modern edge. I launched Maison A 3 years later from that same cramped apartment. I didn't use my last name. I didn't want the Vance name anywhere near my work. I signed every label simply as A. A.Rose. Honoring the woman who gave me the talent. The fashion world loves a mystery. Because no one knew who A.Rose was, the rumors started. Vogue called me the Phantom of Fashion. Celebrities began requesting appointments through encrypted emails. By the time I was 25, Maison A was dressing royalty. But back in New York, to my family, I was still just poor Audrey. I never corrected them. When I called home on holidays, I let them believe I was struggling. I let my mother make passive-aggressive comments about how I should come home and find a husband. I let Serena brag about her marketing promotions, thinking she was the successful one. I realized that silence was my most expensive luxury. They thought I was a failure because they couldn't see my success. They didn't know that the little seamstress they pitied was the same woman whose designs they pinned to their vision boards. I kept my identity a secret to protect my peace. Until Serena tried to buy it. The trap was set on a Tuesday morning in April. I was in my atelier in Le Marais, draping silk over a mannequin, when my head of client relations, Elodie, walked in with a strange expression on her face. "Madame," she said, holding out an iPad. "We have received a request for a bespoke bridal commission. The client is demanding personal attention from A.Rose. She says she is a very influential American socialite." I glanced at the screen. The name on the inquiry form made my blood run cold. Serena Vance. My sister had recently gotten engaged to Julian Thorne, a tech CEO whose net worth was in the billions. Naturally, Serena needed a wedding dress that would land her on the cover of Vogue, but she didn't just want a dress. She wanted a narrative. The email read, "I have a very specific vision for my gown. I am an artist myself, and I have designed the concept. I just need your team to execute my creation." Attached to the email was a file titled my_original_design.jpg. I tapped the file. When the image loaded, the air left my lungs. It wasn't a mood board. It wasn't a sketch Serena had drawn. It was a grainy, low-light photograph of page 42 of Grandma Rose's sketchbook. I remembered the day she took that photo. It was 5 years ago, just before I left for Paris. I had left the book open on the kitchen table. Serena had walked by, laughed, and said, "Cute drawings, Audrey. Maybe one day you can make costumes for a high school play." She must have snapped a picture of it then, not because she admired it, but because she hoarded beautiful things even if she didn't understand them. Now, she was claiming Grandma's masterpiece, the Swan, was her own original design. She wasn't just stealing my work. She was stealing the dead's legacy to feed her ego. "Tell her we accept," I told Elodie, my voice shaking with a cold, quiet rage. "But there are conditions." We drafted the contract immediately. Condition 1. The fee is $50,000. Paid up front, non-refundable. Condition 2. The client acknowledges that Maison A retains all intellectual property rights. Condition 3. All communication will be handled through my assistants. The designer, A.Rose, will only reveal herself upon completion of the garment. Serena replied within the hour. She tried to haggle, of course. She offered exposure to her 2 million followers in exchange for a discount. I instructed Elodie to decline. Serena paid the full $50,000 the next morning. When I saw her signature on the digital contract, Serena Vance, right next to mine, A.Rose, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a grim satisfaction. She thought she was buying a dress. She had no idea she had just signed a confession. The gown was finished. It was a masterpiece of silk and spite, packed in a crate lined with acid-free tissue paper and shipped to New York. The invoice for $50,000 had been paid in full. But there was still one loose end. My invitation. It was 1 month before the wedding. I knew the date. I knew the venue. I knew the menu because my team had overheard Serena bragging about the truffle risotto during her fittings. But my mailbox in Paris remained empty. I decided to make the call. I needed them to say it. I needed to hear the rejection out loud, so I wouldn't feel a shred of guilt for what I was about to do. "Mom," I said when she answered, keeping my voice soft. "I haven't received my invitation to the wedding yet. I need to book my flight." There was a long, awkward pause. I could hear the clinking of china in the background. My mother sighed, the sound of a woman inconvenienced by her own conscience. "Oh, Audrey," she said, her voice dropping to that fake, gentle register she used when she was lying. "We were actually meaning to talk to you about that. The wedding. It's become very complicated. It's strictly A-list now. Julian's business partners, senators, people from Vogue. We just think you would be," she searched for a polite word. "Overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed," I repeated. "I live in Paris, Mom. I run a business. You run a sewing circle." "Audrey," Serena's voice cut in. She must have been listening on the other line. "Let's be real. This wedding is black tie. The guest list is curated. I have 400 of the most important people in New York coming. I can't have my sister showing up in some homemade dress, sitting in the corner looking like the help." "So I'm banned?" I asked. "Because I might embarrass you?" "It's not about embarrassment," Serena lied smoothly, echoing the exact tone she used on her followers. "It's about the aesthetic. And honestly, I invited my designer, A.Rose. She might actually make an appearance. I want to spend my time networking with her, not babysitting you. You understand, right?" The irony was so sharp it almost cut me. She was banning Audrey to make room for A.Rose. She was kicking out her sister to impress the woman she was currently insulting. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady. "I won't come, Serena. I promise." "Good," she said, sounding relieved. "I knew you'd get it. But," I added, "I have already prepared a wedding gift. It's a final accessory for your dress. It's very sentimental. I'll have it dropped off at the reception desk." "Fine," Serena said, bored now that she had gotten her way. "Just make sure it's not something cheap. Julian's family judges everything." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at my phone, the screen going black. She was right about one thing. Julian's family did judge everything, and when they saw what was in that box, the judgment was going to be absolute. On the morning of the wedding, I didn't fly economy. I flew first class from Paris to New York, sipping champagne while my sister prepared to steal my legacy. I arrived at the Plaza Hotel at exactly 5 p.m. The lobby was a sea of pastel gowns and tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I was wearing a tailored black suit from my own collection, sharp, modern, and intimidating. I walked toward the grand ballroom with the confidence of someone who had paid for the centerpiece of the entire event. Two women in black dresses sat behind the guest list, guarding the entrance like gatekeepers of heaven. "Name?" one asked, her smile tight and practiced. "Audrey Vance," I said. "Sister of the bride." The woman's finger traced down the list. "Once. Twice." The smile faltered. She looked at her colleague, then back at me, with that familiar look of pity I had seen my entire childhood. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper so the guests behind me wouldn't hear. "Your name isn't on the list. We have a Mr. and Mrs. Vances and a Miss Serena Vance, obviously. But no Audrey." I didn't argue. I didn't call Serena to beg. I didn't cause a scene. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek, black velvet box, embossed with a single gold letter, A. "That's perfectly fine," I said, placing the box gently on the white tablecloth. "I expected as much. But I need you to deliver this to the bride immediately. It is the final accessory for her gown." The receptionist hesitated, eyeing the box. "Is it from the family?" "No," I said, leaning in slightly. "Tell her it is from the designer. Tell her A.Rose sent it personally." The woman's eyes widened. She nodded vigorously, treating the box like it was a holy relic. She had no idea she was holding a grenade. I turned on my heel and walked out of the hotel, the heavy glass doors closing behind me. I didn't go to the airport like I did 10 years ago. Instead, I crossed Fifth Avenue and sat at a window seat in a bistro directly facing the plaza. I ordered a black coffee, opened my iPad, and navigated to Serena's Instagram page. She was live. There she was, standing on a raised platform in the ballroom, holding a microphone. She looked breathtaking in the dress I had designed, basking in the adoration of 400 people. She was laughing, blowing kisses, completely unaware that the black box was currently making its way through the crowd toward the stage. I took a sip of coffee and watched the screen. It was time for the unboxing. From my seat in the cafe across the street, the image on my iPad was crystal clear. The camera zoomed in on Serena as she stood on the raised dais of the grand ballroom. She held the black velvet box aloft like a trophy, bathing in the applause of 400 guests. "And now," Serena announced, her voice breathless with excitement, "a very special surprise from the woman of the hour. My dearest friend, my collaborator, and the genius behind this gown, A.Rose." The crowd cheered. My parents beamed from the head table, looking like they had personally orchestrated the sun rising that morning. Serena untied the silk ribbon with a flourish. She was expecting a diamond tiara. She was expecting a necklace to match the stolen design. She lifted the lid. Her smile faltered instantly. There was no sparkle of diamonds inside, just paper. Confused, but still trying to maintain her composure for the cameras, she reached in and pulled out the contents. The first item was a high-resolution photocopy of an old, yellowed document. "What is this?" she murmured, but her microphone picked it up. She stared at the paper. It was page 42 of Grandma Rose's sketchbook, dated 1958, the sketch of the Swan. Beneath it, a side-by-side comparison of the photo Serena had secretly taken of that very page 5 years ago. The color drained from her face, but she couldn't stop. Her hands, now trembling, pulled out the second document. It was the Maison commission contract. The camera focus was sharp enough that even on my iPad, I could see the bold header, Invoice number 001. It listed the price $50,000 and the client's signature, Serena Vance, and then, the final card. Serena read it silently, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. But Julian, her billionaire husband, stepped closer. He looked confused. He reached out and took the card from her paralyzed fingers. "What does it say?" Julian asked, leaning into the microphone. He read the words aloud before he realized what he was doing. "To my sister Serena, you stole the design, but you had to pay for the talent. Enjoy the dress. Audrey A. Rose." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a physical weight. "Audrey?" Julian repeated, looking from the card to his wife. "Your sister? The seamstress you said was a failure?" A woman in the front row, the editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine, stood up. Her voice cut through the silence. "Wait a minute. Audrey Vance is a... Rose? The Audrey Vance?" Serena panicked. No, this is a prank. She's lying. She's just jealous." But Julian was reading the contract now. "Serena," he said, his voice cold, stripping away the romance of the day. "You told me Rose gifted this to you because you were her muse. You told me you designed this together. This says you paid $50,000 for a service." I can explain," Serena stammered, tears of humiliation finally spilling over. "You hired your own sister," Julian continued, looking at her like she was a stranger. "You banned her from the wedding, lied to everyone about who she was, and then wore her work down the aisle?" On my iPad screen, the Livestream comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "The sister is A.Rose? Oh my God, she just got exposed in 4K. The husband looks done." I watched Serena look around the room, searching for an ally. She looked at our parents. My father was staring at his shoes. My mother had her hand over her mouth. They were frozen. For the first time in their lives, they couldn't protect her. The lie was too big, and the stage was too bright. I took a final sip of my coffee, closed the cover of my iPad, and signaled for the check. The show was over. The silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above them. From my screen across the street, I saw the exact moment the atmosphere shifted from celebration to interrogation. Julian, the man who had just promised to love my sister for richer or poorer, was staring at the document in his hand like it was a contagious disease. "Serena," Julian said, his voice amplified by the microphone he forgot he was holding. "This is an invoice for $50,000. He looked up, his eyes cold. You told me Rose gifted you this dress because you were her inspiration. You told Vogue that you co-designed this. I did, Serena stammered, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. Audrey is she's the seamstress. She just sewed it. She's trying to take credit for my vision. She looked around the room, desperate for someone to believe her. She's jealous. She's always been jealous because I'm the creative one. She forged these. That was the moment the final domino fell. A woman in the second row stood up. It was Alara Vance, no relation, the editor-in-chief of Runway magazine, one of the most powerful women in fashion. I had dressed her for the Met Gala last year, though she had never seen my face. But she knew my work. That sketch, the editor said, her voice cutting through Serena's panic. She pointed to the yellowed photocopy of Grandma Rose's design on the stage, the bird wing neckline, the dropped waist structure. That isn't a doodle. That is the signature architectural style of A.Rose. I have studied her collections for years. She turned to look at my parents, then back at Serena. And if Audrey Vance owns the copyright to that sketch, then Audrey Vance is A.Rose. A collective gasp swept through the room. It started as a ripple and turned into a wave. The 400 guests, senators, socialites, and business tycoons weren't looking at Serena anymore. They were looking at the empty space where I should have been. The sister? Someone whispered near the camera. The one she didn't invite? The failure sister? Runs Maisonnet? She's wearing a stolen dress. Serena's facade shattered. She grabbed the microphone, screeching now. She's lying. She's a nobody. She lives in a studio apartment. Mom, Dad, tell them! My parents stood up, but they didn't rush to her defense. My father looked at the contract projected on the screens by the videographer who had zoomed in on the gift. He saw the logo. He saw the numbers. He saw the truth he had ignored for a decade. He sat back down, putting his head in his hands. Julian dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. He didn't scream. He didn't yell. He simply turned his back on his bride and walked off the stage. On my iPad, the Livestream viewer count hit 50,000. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur of fire emojis and broken heart symbols. My sister wanted to be viral. She wanted the world to see her wedding, and now, they finally saw her. I closed the cover of my iPad and signaled for the check. The live stream had ended, but the real drama was just beginning. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. The clip of Serena opening the box went viral, amassing 10 million views in 48 hours. The internet is a cruel judge, and the verdict was unanimous. Serena Vance was a fraud. Julian didn't wait. His lawyers filed for an annulment based on fraud the very next morning. It turns out, billionaires don't like being married to liabilities. Serena lost her apartment, her brand deals, and her reputation. She tried to call me once, leaving a voicemail where she screamed that I had ruined her life. I didn't listen to the end. I simply deleted it. My parents were next. Suddenly, they remembered they had a second daughter. They sent emails claiming they were so proud of my success and that they always knew I was special. They even suggested we meet for dinner to discuss business opportunities for Maison A. I responded with a single legal document, a cease and desist order, barring them from using my name or my company's likeness for any financial gain. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because, as Grandma Rose taught me, you have to protect your art from people who only know how to consume it. 3 months later, I used the profits from the Swan dress and a significant portion of my savings to buy back my grandmother's old house in the Hamptons, the one my parents had sold years ago to fund Serena's lifestyle. I am currently turning it into the Rose Foundation, a museum dedicated to her unseen designs and a scholarship program for young designers who, like me, were told they were nothing but seamstresses. I stood in the attic yesterday, the same place where I learned to sew in the dark. It's filled with light now. The dust is gone. The silence isn't lonely anymore. It's peaceful. If you have watched this story from the beginning, I want you to remember one thing. In the architecture of your life, do not let anyone treat you like a mannequin, a prop to be dressed up. used, and pushed into the corner. You are the designer. You hold the needle, you decide the pattern, the fabric, and the cut. And if the people around you don't fit your measurements, you don't alter yourself to fit them. You edit them out of the collection. My name is Audrey. I am A.Rose, and my runway is finally my own. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe in reclaiming your own worth, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, what is the one dream you are protecting from the people who don't understand it? I'll be reading your stories.